You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again. And today, just like any other time, we have another guest today. Today, man, we're going to talk to our special guest, Logan Huford. And he is going to share with us his powerful story, his own testimony of his life. First and foremost, man, I just want to jump into this. The topic today is creating healthy habits, and you're going to learn about that reason why I chose that topic. So first and foremost, man, Logan, thank you for your time. How you doing, man?
Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate being here. Doing well.
So I know I said I'm going to jump right into it. I am, man. Tell us the story and tell us why you're here, because it is a very specific reason. I think it's for a good cause.
Yeah, I am here to shout from the rooftops, and specifically your rooftop right now today, that there is hope even in the darkest of times. And for me, what the darkest of times looked like was being trapped in addiction, being trapped in sexual addiction. For many, many years, I was a raging sex addict, and porn, affairs, got to the point where I was hiring prostitutes and phone sex and just everything, plus other addictive behaviors, sports gambling and, drinking out of control and all kinds of things. But specifically, I was trying to juggle these two things, this double life of, on one hand, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a believer in God. And on the other hand, I'm cheating on my wife all the time. I'm looking at porn all the time. I'm flirting with every woman and seeking out whatever I can seek out from every woman in my path. And just this lying, manipulative, sociopathic monster. And it got to the point where I hated my life. I hated that I was a dad. I hated that I was a husband. Not because I didn't love my wife and kids. It was because I hated that they had me. And that's a really, really dark way to live, but that's where I lived for many years. Thankfully, starting in 2016, that was the first moment that I had hope. That was the first moment that I went to. It wasn't the first time I went to a meeting. I first went to a meeting in 2015, a recovery meeting, but I didn't see hope there. What I saw there was some other guys that struggled. And so it was like, okay, I've been trapped in this cave for years, and I felt like I'm the only one trapped in this cave. So when I went to that meeting in 2015, I saw that there were other guys in the cave, right? But it didn't actually give me hope, because it's like, we're all just trapped here. But in 2016, I went to a group called Prodigals. And there's not a lot of Prodigals groups out there, but there was a couple, there was one up here in Alaska. And I went to one. And I saw at that meeting, not just the guys that struggled, but guys who had freedom, guys that had 5, 10, 15 years of sobriety, healthy living. Most of them have restored marriages. And I'm like, holy crap, I didn't think this was possible. I didn't know what these guys had to do to get there, but I was willing to try. And shortly thereafter, a couple months later, I got into a mentorship program. It was a 2-year voluntary house arrest. And recovery has never left my life. Accountability has never left my life. And so right now I'm just on a mission to talk about sexual addiction awareness, recovery, what God has done in my life, and the transformation that is available, even if I'm trapped in the worst of the worst addictions.
And when you look at where you are now, you being very honest about your story, what you had to go through, but not just that, the people that you love, what they had to go through. At what point did you say, you know what, this is something that has to change and go to the next chapter in my life? At what point did you say, you know what, all right, mindset wise, this is what I gotta do?
Well, I mean, it's like there's two different ways to answer that question, because on one hand, I mean, within about a year into marriage, I had felt bad before. Like, I had cheated on my wife, both with pornography and with physical affairs before we got married. And I felt bad about that. But there was still part of me that felt like, well, once we get married and we're going to live together, like I'll clean it up and I'll just be a good boy. You know, I'll be a good husband. I'll calm down. But when we got married and we're living together and she's pregnant with our first son pretty quickly and I'm still doing it, that's when I got scared. I'm like, oh crap, like I'm still doing these things. In fact, it's getting worse. So that was the first moment. It wasn't a singular day, but around that time, within the first year of marriage, when things were only getting worse, that would have been like the first season of my life where I'm like, okay, there's a problem here. I didn't know what the problem was. I didn't know the term sexual addiction. I didn't know the recovery existed for it. And then the second way to answer your question would be, really, I mean, it would be, around in 2016 when, and it was a process. It was a series of moments, but just recognizing, there's multiple guys that have different versions of my story, and they've been able to find freedom. And in some ways, it wasn't even until like 2 years of sobriety. It wasn't until I was almost graduated from the program that I really, truly, I knew, like, no, I'm not in that cave anymore. I don't have to go back. I could if I wanted to, but I don't have to go back. Like, those shackles are off of me, and it's up to me whether or not I put those shackles back on.
And for our listening audience, I said in the beginning, talking about creating healthy habits for yourself. How did you come up with a strategy and say, okay, this is a path forward that I can use to overcome, this addiction? For you personally, kind of illustrate that for the audience. What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So, okay, I love the question, and I'm going to emphasize a couple of your words. You said, how did you come up with a strategy? And I'm just going to make sure to emphasize this for the audience. The way that I came up with strategies was by God's grace. It was not me. It was not just me. It was me submitting to a group of men. A whole mentorship team worked with me and other guys that were in the mentorship program. And I had to do a lot of freaking work. I had to do a lot of homework, writing out boundaries and safety plans, and coming up with different rules that I would follow, and coming up with my own stuff. It wasn't me following other people's rules. There was some of that, but it was taking ownership of what are the things in my control? What are the things that I need to be doing differently? And then following through on that. And if I broke a rule, if I crossed a boundary, I report that stuff, and I was accountable for the consequences. But it was amazing, and still is amazing how, God has poured people into my life that, love me enough to hold me accountable, love me enough to give me tough feedback, love me enough to support me, and, give me that grace and comfort at times, and other times poke me in the gut and call me out on my BS. But it absolutely was, it was immersing myself in this environment of lots of other men who want to seek healthy living. And that, no matter what somebody's going through, is I got to do that. I have to find people that have the type of life that I want, that have the type of healing that I would want, right? And copy them, mirror them, surround myself with them, seek their feedback. And I'm so grateful, and I thank God every single day for recovery, for salvation and for recovery, because the people that flooded my life, that's what helped me to see these two things are true. Number one, yes, I'm in control of my choices. So I need to take ownership of that, right? Extreme ownership. But at the same time, I didn't know how to be healthy. I didn't know what it took to build a healthy infrastructure. And of course, part of that was, deconstructing an unhealthy infrastructure. So, these guys that were part of my life, they came in and they helped me do it brick by brick.
This is I Am Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Logan Huford, and let's unpack that even further. When you talk about taking ownership, one thing that comes to mind is also understanding there's going to be moments where you're going to have lack of motivation. And what you just said moments ago about kind of dismantling the old way and start building the new way, let's dive deep into that, because when you see where you were back then versus where you are now today, would you say that part of you was broken and that also had to heal?
Oh, absolutely. I don't shy away from that. And I've gotten pushback on that verbiage. But I say it for a reason, because I think it's true. I had a lot of brokenness. I was a broken person. And that doesn't mean, identity matters and titles matter, but they don't have to be forever, right? Like I had to recognize that there was brokenness. I had to recognize that there was corruption in my infrastructure. There was corruption in how I interacted with life. Now, that didn't mean that I had to stay that way. That's why when I introduce myself now, I'm Logan Hufford, and I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction. I don't introduce myself as an addict. But there was a time where I needed to, because there was a time when I was in that cave, and I was in that cave for a while. So absolutely, brokenness was so prevalent in my life and just how I interacted with things around me.
I want you to give the website for our audience that you have. And after that, I also want you to kind of illustrate the experience being those groups and how they were relatable to understand everyone's unique story. Yeah.
So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you the best way to get in contact with me, the best way to learn more about, what I do and just this mission and sexual addiction awareness. If you have Instagram, check me out on Instagram. No longer in bondage. There's periods in between the words. No longer in bondage. Of course, you can search my name, Logan Hufford. It'll come right up. But I put out a lot of content, regular content on, talking about sexual addiction awareness, recovery tools, practical, tangible tools. It's not fluffy stuff. It's not, a couple trendy motivational phrases on a B-roll of, a lake. It's like, no, this is real stuff. And then in terms of some other tools, and a list of recommended books, if you want to understand more about this, the Prodigals of Alaska website, prodigalsofalaska.com, you can go to that as well. And of course, you can always reach out to me on Instagram if you want to understand more about these books. But I didn't design that website. My mentor actually did. But it has, some good resources and tools that you can read about and understanding more things like the relapse cycle. What does it look like for an addict to go through that relapse cycle? But yeah, first and foremost, if anybody wants to get in contact with me, just reach out to me on Instagram, give me a follow, and I think you will find it beneficial and insightful.
In addition to that, your experience being those groups, piggyback on that real fast. When you went through that whole process, what was some of the common ground that you noticed with other men in those groups, and how did that make an impact to maybe allow each of y'all to understand that, wow, okay, it ain't just me?
Yeah. One thing that was very powerful and still is very powerful is recognizing, like, man, I can share the darkest of dark stuff from my past when I'm sharing my story, or early on. Sometimes it was stuff that I was still struggling with or still doing, right? It was like, I can share any of this and it's not going to blow them away. Like, they've heard it all, right? They've heard it all. So it doesn't give me permission to go out and do dumb stuff, but it does mean I don't need to feel embarrassed, like, oh, they're going to mock me or they're going to shame me or they're going to hate. It's like, no, they're going to just recognize, okay, yeah, you did that stuff. Okay, well, how can we work on it, right? What can we do better? How can we support you? That kind of thing. So recognizing that they've kind of heard it all was so huge. And that continues, new guys come to the group and they get to hear our stories. And, my story is different from my mentor's story. My story is different from other guys, right? And there's one of the guys that's closest, that I'm closest to in the groups, his addiction and how he acted out in his addiction sent him to prison. And he's done some of the worst things a human could do. His story is different than mine. But when you hear our stories, if you come to that group and you're new, what that does is it allows you to see, okay, here's two different guys have two different stories, and yet both of them have experienced healing. Both of them have experienced transformation. And that enables somebody to show up and be vulnerable, right? Because you're not going to share anything that's going to make us feel like, oh, whoa, you're a weirdo. Like, no, we've heard it all. And that to me, that's one of the biggest things that's come out of the groups.
And tying this back to the topic, creating healthy habits, when you look at how you're able to share this story, share it with many platforms, and continuously be able to just kind of just shine a light, if you will.
Yeah.
When it comes to celebration mode, how have you been able to celebrate the fact that this is you today versus you no longer who you used to be in the past?
Right. Well, maybe the most obvious thing that comes to mind is, I love sobriety coins. And it's something that I hold dear to my heart, even though, yeah, they're just metal or they're just plastic, but it's a reminder on those dark days or on those tough days, on those hard days where I'm struggling, I'm feeling temptation. Maybe I've given into some version of temptation. I yelled at my kids, and I was like, because I can start to feel like, man, am I a fraud? Like, have I just been, behavior modification, but there's actually no healing? Like, those thoughts come into my head sometimes. And yet to be able to reach into my pocket and go, I'm not perfect, and I'm never going to be perfect on this earth, but I'm not the old man that I was. I'm not the guy that I was 8-9 years ago. And that says something. I have not given into pornography. I have not had another affair. I have not broken my marriage vows for the last 8 years. Like, that's powerful, because I couldn't say that, right, for so many years. So that's just one version, of celebration, but it's huge. And just recognizing now sobriety, the amount of days that I've been sober, that can't be the finish line. It's not just a lack of acting out, right? There needs to be work on from the inside out, right? Getting healthier as a person. But it starts by not acting out. It starts by having that sobriety.
We're talking to Logan Huford. My next question for you is, what were some of the mind shifts that you had to just continuously do in order for you to sustain the new you as far as how you see yourself?
The biggest one might be taking ownership. So I was introduced to, Jocko Willink and extreme ownership shortly after I got into recovery. And I'm thankful for it, because that has been very helpful for me to recognize what role do I play and what things can I do? Because there's a whole lot in life that I can't control. There's a whole lot that I can't, but what things can I do better? Where can I take ownership? That's been huge. And the other piece that ties into that is, so one of the tools that I had to do in recovery, it's mandatory, is when I was in that program, I had to make a phone call every single day. Outgoing phone call from me to another brother. And in that phone call, I share how my day has been, and since my last phone call. And, here's the stressors that I've had. Here's how I've acted inappropriately or wrongly. Here's the temptations I've had. Here's how I've been frustrated, angry, whatever, just life stuff, right? And then when I'm done, I shut up and listen. I'm not allowed to respond. I'm not allowed to counter anything that you might say. And you might give me a whole bunch of advice or ask me a whole bunch of questions, or you may not. But regardless, by me not being allowed to respond unless you ask me a direct question, it forces me to sit and listen and absorb anything that you have to say. It doesn't mean I have to take all your advice, but it forces me to just, hey, it's okay to sit and listen. It's okay to not try to have a rebuttal for everything, to defend myself and play the victim. Like, that's a heck of a muscle to learn. It's a heck of a muscle to exercise. It's a heck of a skill to learn. And yet that's something I did not learn until recovery. And I'm so thankful, because that has helped me throughout life, as a dad, as a parent, as an employee. So, and again, it circles back to taking ownership, right? What are the things that I can work on right now? Tangible, concrete things that I can improve in my life or in my behavior.
You mentioned earlier in the interview about how your faith played a role. for our audience, for you personally, since this is something that impacted you, explain to the audience how your faith grew after overcoming this and how it played a role to help you understand that there is a brighter day.
Yeah, for me, that is that's the core of it all. In other ways, it's the glue that holds it all together at the same time, because I 100% believe that an atheist, somebody who believes in a different God than myself, anyone can use these tools and use corrective measures. You don't have to have the same faith to use things to work on healthy changes. But I do believe, and I'm not here to preach to anyone, but I absolutely believe this, that recovery being centered, or because it was a Christ-centered recovery program, centered around the fact that it's not just healthier changes. It's not just doing things better, but it's centered around a relationship with my Creator, with my Savior. That is central to the transformative healing that took place. And so I'm not here to preach or convince anyone, but I always will emphasize that because it is so huge. Again, it's not just about the sobriety. It's about true transformative healing.
And tying this back to creating healthy habits, do you see yourself not struggling as much when it comes to looking for those creative habits to create versus the way your mind could have been in the past?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. Number one, the way you said it, I would say is accurate. I don't struggle as much. Well, 100% get tempted by things. I 100% can and do struggle, but it's not as much. The other piece is there used to be most of my life, the first 28 years of my life, which is like through the first couple years of recovery even, if there would be a strong enough trigger, if there would be a strong enough temptation or a situation, it almost felt automatic. Like I'm going to have to act out, or I'm going to have to flirt with this woman, or I'm going to have to look at them. And then, there were some cases where circumstances themselves, I've shared some of these stories on Instagram, like circumstances themselves kind of got in the way of and made it where, okay, it's not going to happen, thankfully. But especially in my addiction, if there was a strong enough trigger, I just felt like I had to give in. And it honestly didn't feel, of course I had a choice, but it didn't feel in the moment like I did have a choice. And that has 100% changed. Like I encounter triggers every day. And yet I don't feel like I have to. It's like the shackles are over there. I can see them and I could go walk over there and put the shackles on myself, but I don't need to. Whereas before, not only could I see the shackles, I was wearing them, so it was a very different thing. But what it's also allowed me to do, just to get real specific, is, with the sexual addiction, I mean, again, for me, it was porn, it was affairs, it was just flirting with every woman in my path. I was essentially a predator to basically every woman around me. Now, I didn't do all the same things with it, but I would flirt and seek and get what I could get from every woman. I had almost no healthy frame of mind when it came to dealing with a woman, because it was all about what could I get. And there was a period of recovery. There was a period of time where the most important thing for me sometimes was just to get away from any triggering situation. But what's been able to happen over the course of time, over the course of years of healthier living, is to recognize that, in life, I'm going to deal with people, and some of those people are going to be women. And some of those people are going to be women that are attractive that I'm talking to. I can engage with those people in a healthy way. I don't have to just freeze and white knuckle it and try to run away. If I got to do that, I got to do that. But I can also engage with people in a healthy way. I didn't think that was possible for a long, long time. And I'm thankful for that, because it allows me to be a loving, healthy person from a holistic perspective in a way that I could not do before.
That's I Am Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Logan Huford. One more question for you, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up, is lastly, touch on the word freedom. When you look at your life now, how has freedom for you been defined? And especially now that you're able to share what you've been through with people basically around the world now.
Well, I keep using that metaphor of the shackles, right? And so that, I'll start there. Like recognizing that I'm not in those shackles, man. I can live my life. I can walk around in life and I'm not bound to like this rotting corpse. And that's how it felt. But I'm also going to circle back to something I mentioned at the start of our conversation, which is I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I've got 4 boys. Our kids are 12, 11, 10, and 8. So all 4 of those boys were conceived and born into an addict's home. That's a heck of a thing. For me to come home every night, and most of the time, I would say hi or say goodnight, to my boys and give them a kiss goodnight. But man, I was a shell of a man. I knew the things that I'd been doing earlier that day, the day before, the week before. I knew the types of stuff I was looking up on my phone, the types of things that I was saying to women, right? Like, let alone I'm coming home saying hi to my wife, right? And I'm saying goodbye to my wife when I go to work. And I know the stuff I'm doing in secret. For me to be able to just interact with my family, not perfectly, because I'll never be perfect, but without secrecy, without shame, and just love them, and just be my wife's friend, and just be my kid's dad, and, do what I can to lead and mentor and teach those boys. That's freedom. And that is something I did not think I could ever have, because I just figured I've done too much. I've signed away any freedom. I've signed away my future. I will never be a dad who can lead my boys. But God has given me the opportunity to lead them and to love them. And I'm so thankful for that. So that is freedom to me.
Once again, been listening to I Am Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Logan Huford. Once again, I just want to say to you, appreciate what you shared on the show. Hopefully it will inspire many. And it takes a lot for a person to show up and be transparent like you and have done on the show today. So I want to say thank you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.